Okay guys, we're going to go and do Lilith on our Burning Hydra Sork. I've used a Elixir of Advantage just for the extra attack speed. This build will not struggle on the damage, it is pretty much just avoiding the mechanics. So as long as you don't mess those up, you're all good to go. So we're going to place down a Firewall, that gives us extra bonus multiplicative damage there. We're going to teleport into her once to get extra 5% from our Glyph. And from our Tower of Shards for the lightning damage proc, and then we're just going to spam all of our skills just to burn her down. And we aim to get her down to 0% at the end of this stage, so that we just have to avoid one set of mechanics. But as you go, so she's at 0%, so now we just need to avoid the mechanics. So we can just do that around here. And then we need to avoid a couple more. And then hopefully, which comes down, she's dead. Right, so now we're into stage 2, no problem. So pretty much second stage is exactly the same. We're going to place down a Firewall, we're going to teleport into her, we're going to jump over the other side onto the where the first platform would break, and then the idea is to crowd control her pretty much immediately, because that will allow us to get her down 0% HP, and then it is just avoiding the ghost. That's all you need to do. So there you go, got the Hydras. We're going to do, as I said, the camera seems to bug down her, which is not ideal, but we should be okay here. So crowd controlled almost immediately, and you can see she just absolutely burns down. So now we've done that, no problem. So now we're just going to sit over here and we're going to wait. We're going to wait for her to come over and do her mechanics. The ghosts are going to start spawning on us, so we're going to start moving now. We're going to start rotating around. We pretty much, this is the only reason you're going to fail Lilith on this build at this point. It's pretty good for bossing. So now we just need to survive the mechanics of her. So we're going to wait a little bit, so we don't have to stay on this platform too long with the ghosts. So we can just come over here, back on here. I'm going to rotate around again. Use a skill to keep a shield up, and then we're going to rotate around again. And we can use teleports to get out of the sticky situation as well if we need to. And because we didn't take too many stacks at the start, the ghosts don't one-shot us because we're pretty tanky on this build. And there we go. Once we pass this stage, just place down your Hydras, spam your skills, and she'll die. Nice and easy. You can absolutely do Lilith carries on this build. It's really not that difficult. It's literally just avoiding the mechanics, and I'm not fully built on this build. Okay, guys. So everyone knows that there's a really good leveling Sork build for Hydra, using Hydra Firewall, and that helps you blast all the way to level 70 no problem. Most builds have said to swap from that because it's viable up to level 100 but not really endgame viable. So I took it upon myself to, as a bit of a challenge, to try and see if we could make it endgame viable, to see if it could do Lilith, to see if it could do tormented bosses and carry them and do the top hordes and such. And it turns out that it can be done. I have gone all in on the dot damage, and I'm pleased to be able to bring to you the Burning Hydra build. So without further ado, let's go through the skill trees and see how we got. So I've reset the skill tree here so I can run you through it. So to begin with, you will want to go 1 point in Firebolt, 2nd in Firebolt, and I take the 3rd point in Glinting Firebolt, because this, if you can use it in your build rotation, gives you 25% multiplicative burning damage. That's really nice. If you don't have the Shaco on, you will need to put a point into Frostbolt, because this I found to be probably the most useful 2nd enchant, but we'll go into that later. So if you, let's just assume we've got a Shaco right now. You come down, and you're going to just want to put in enough points in this node here to be able to reach down to your defensive skills. So when you're leveling up, you will want to take 1 point in Fireball, again if you haven't got the Shaco, because Fireball is absolutely brilliant for leveling up. You will absolutely want to put this on as your first enchant. But since we've got the Shaco on, we will not need to put any points there. So we're just going to put 1 point into Devastation, and we're going to put 2 points into Elemental Dominance, because that brings us down to defensive skill trees. We won't need any points in Potent Warding, naturally, because you're going to have so much resistances anyway on this build, you do not need the extra here. We come down, and then you're going to want to put points in Teleport, points in Enhanced Teleport, and you're going to want to take a point in Shimmering Teleport here as well. And on top of that, you're going to want to take Ice Armor, Enhanced Ice Armor, and Shimmering Ice Armor. Now, the reason we've gone for Shimmering over Mystical Ice Armor here is because until you've got enough cooldown reduction that you no longer need Shimmering Ice Armor, this just helps you keep Ice Armor up more, which allows you to just stay tankier. And yeah, Shimmering Teleport is just extra defense as well. You don't need any more than 1 point in these. Your Shaco and your cooldown reduction should make them usable enough anyway, and we're going to use our points elsewhere. So that allows us to come down here, and we can put 1 point into Hydra, 1 point into Enhanced Hydra so we can get an extra Hydra head, which we're aiming to be healthy all the time on this build. And then most importantly, and this is literally how the build works, Summon Hydra. This makes it so that your Hydras deal 100% of its base damage over 6 seconds as burning damage. Now the really important part here is its base damage. It does not scale with levels on Hydra. It takes the base damage of Hydra. The numbers you see here is damage that is scaled by your intelligence and all other modifiers. It's not the base damage. So you only need 1 point in Hydra. It does not scale the burning damage. And since this build is all focused on the burning dot damage, we do not need to put any more points here. On top of this, to get down to the next tree, we're just going to put a point in Conjuration Mastery here. In fact, we're actually going to max that out since we've got all our points available at level 100. You're going to want Conjuration Mastery. Is very strong in all Sorc builds right now, but since you're going to have 3 Hydras up all the time and at least 1 or 2 Ice Blades up as well, you're going to have at least 5, maybe up to 7 stacks of Conjuration Masteries. This is very powerful for mana regeneration, movement speed, and damage. And then on top of that, we're going to have 1 point in Ice Blades, 1 point in Enhanced Ice Blades, and then I take Summoned Ice Blades because this just, again, helps with cooldown reduction. But I think later on, if you got a triple Masterwork Shaco and you had really good, and you had GAs in cooldown in your Tower Shards and such, you could probably go for Invoked Ice Blades to make them attack faster to help with the vulnerable application if you would like. But for now, I have taken the Summoned Ice Blades node because that just, again, helps a little bit with cooldown reduction. And whilst we're here, we're going to take all 3 points in Align the Elements for defense. We're going to take all 3 points in Protection for defense and all 3 points in Mana Shield for defense. You're not reliant on this for your defense, but it certainly helps. And if you can keep your Ice Armor up enough, your Align the Elements becomes a permanent 60% damage reduction modifier, which is extremely powerful. So now we come down to the Mastery skill tree. The most important thing we're going to take here is Firewall. We're going to take Enhanced Firewall. We're going to take, and most importantly, Mage's Firewall as well. So we only take 1 point here because this isn't our main source of damage. You could take more points here for more damage, but really this isn't where your big damage is coming from. It's Hydras that's going to be applying the most burning damage. But the main thing is here, Enhanced Firewall gives you 25% multiplicative increased burning damage while they're standing in it. But then if you take Mage's Firewall, it allows it to work for 3 seconds after they're standing in it as well. So that's another 25% burning damage there. So that's pretty huge. And whilst we're here, we can take 3 points in Inner Flame, because while you're healthy, that's 12% Pyromancy skills, and you're aiming to be healthy all the time. And then we're going to take 3 points in Crippling Flames, which when you're leveling up, you will take this last, because Lucky Hit isn't the strongest part of this build. But we take this because when you're healthy, as again we're aiming to be healthy all the time, this will double up your immobilize to 42% chance. And on this build, you want to be applying as many different crowd control effects as possible. We do not take Devouring Blaze because this is all based on the burning damage, and this only scales on hit damage, so that does not aid us in this build. So we come down to the ultimate skills tree, and we pretty much take 1 point in Fiery Surge, and then we just max out all the other nodes. And the reason for this being 3 points in Endless Pyre. You're aiming to have the enemies burning permanently, pretty much, with Hydras. Every time they hit, they're going to be casting burning, so 15% multiplicative damage here is very strong. And later, if you can get this on your Amulet as well for +4 ranks, that can give you another 20% multiplicative damage. So this can be very, very strong for burning damage scaling. We take Soulfire for the extra mana reduction and pyromancy skills, and extra 6% multiplicative damage. And these are doubled if you're standing still for 2 seconds, which if you play the build correct, you can do quite a bit. And then Warmth is where your biggest tankiness comes from on this build after your barriers. And now I've got 9 ranks here with the Shaco on and such, which means for every burning enemy I get 9% of my maximum life healing per second, and on bosses 36%. It pretty much means I instantly heal the second I'm hurt as long as I've got burning enemies around me. It's absolutely insane. You could get more ranks than this in here and it just makes you tankier. So this is very, very strong. And then absolutely key, Combustion. Very, very powerful. It's another node that got buffed. It gives you 60% multiplicative burning damage, and for every unique source of burning, you get 4% multiplicative damage. Now, I haven't been able to test to see if the 3 different Hydras count as unique sources, but let's just assume that's one. But you've got Hydras, you've got Firewalls, and you've got your Firebolt if you do manage to use that on your rotation. So that's 3 sources. So at bare minimum, you can get to 72% multiplicative burning damage here. So that's very nice. And then your remaining points, we're going to go and put 1 point into permafrost, pretty much so that we can come to Hoarfrost here. The reason for this being, when you take the Frostbolt enchant, which is what I've decided to sit on in the final build, your every single hit of Hydra, it's non-lucky based. It means you're permanently applying shields. You're getting 9% bonus multiplicative damage to them. And that can lead towards freezing them. And it also means when you stagger a boss or when you freeze an enemy, you get 18% multiplicative damage as well, which is just very strong for pretty much any Sorc build, for bossing particularly, which this build is actually quite good at bossing. And then if we come up, we're going to... You could take these a bit early if you wanted to, but we just want 3 points in Glass Cannon for 18% multiplicative damage. And, you know, they buffed this last season so that it doesn't apply as much damage increase to you now. And then we just take 1 point in Elemental Attunement here, just in case one of the lucky hits procs a reset on your defensive skills, which can be very nice. I tend to take this myself on pretty much every Sorc build as a sort of just in case. It tends to proc most of the time. Now, the order I've just taken all those skills is slightly out of order compared to the build guide. The build guide will be linked in the description below. Feel free to link on that, and that's got leveling paths on it. This is the final Uber build path. When you're leveling up, as I said, you'll be probably wanting to put a point into Fireball. And then at the point where you want to swap Fireball out, you're probably going to want to put a point into Frostbolt. In terms of the endgame enchantments, I've kind of covered that a little bit already, but the first one is Ice Blades. The reason for this being, you're going to be trying to spam your Ice Armor and your Ice Blades at least most of the time, and possibly teleport, so you just want to be getting as many conjurations up as possible. With this enchant on, your Ice Blades will potentially give you an extra one every time that you use 40 seconds of cooldowns, which gives you extra damage, extra mana, regen, and extra movement speed, so that's great. And then I tested all the other skills out pretty much to see what sat best. Hydra is an option, but in reality, you do not proc this that often after spending 200 mana, and 5 heads of Hydra is not going to make that much of a difference to your build if you're only spawning them every now and then. And then I tested out Firewall. That's a viable option if you want free firewalls. If you want to be lazy with it, that could definitely be an option. What other options did we have here? We had Frost Nova, lucky hit, so it could cast Frost Nova for you from your conjurations. That's an option as well. There's a whole bunch of options in here, but I ended up sitting on Frostbolt because this is non-lucky hit based, and it applies Chill, which procs our Hoarfrost, and it procs, more importantly, one of our main aspects in our gear, which gives you 40% multiplicative damage on a single hit without having to worry about anything else. So that instantly outweighs the extra damage you'll get for a Hydra and waiting for the lucky hit Frost Nova, I find. And this just really does stagger bosses very quickly, or helps you get there anyway. So on that note, let's go into the Paragon Boards. So this is by no means the cleanest Paragon board, but it's pretty optimized, and this works for both leveling and for the final board. So we're just coming up in our starter board. We stick in Elementalist here. You get your bonus fire, cold, and lightning damage. You can proc all these. You're getting your fire, obviously, from your Hydras. Your cold's coming from your Ice Blades attacking, and your lightning. But lightning, you just TP. You teleport onto an enemy just to hit them once, and once you've procced that stack, you can just sit there and profit from the Hydras hitting and resetting that constantly. So you get 15% multiplicative damage here, and it gives you a bunch of free non-physical damage, which is actually quite important on this build, as I'll go into as we go through. So we come through here, taking the non-physical damage nodes. We don't take all these nodes down here because we just don't need all the all-res. With the Tyrael's Mice on, you've just so over resistanced anyway, you just don't need to worry about them. And then we come through the Burning Instinct board. We come through to the glyph straight away. I've used Tactician here because it gives you a phenomenal amount of extra damage reduction from burning enemies, of which you're going to be doing all the time. So that just helps with tankiness. You get your 10% multiplicative damage after casting defensive skill, which you're going to be doing pretty much all the time. Gives you a bit of extra additive burning damage and intelligence, which if you haven't already noticed, intelligence is very strong now. It used to be 1% extra damage per 10 intelligence. It is now 1% extra of damage per 8 intelligence. It got to 25% buff. So intelligence is a very strong damage scaler for any form of damage. And when you're going into dot damage, intelligence is actually pretty key for this. So we've just taken the nodes down here to be able to proc the dexterity the most optimally we can, with the rare nodes as well to benefit from those. And then we've come through, we come up here and get the damage reduction from elites, because that's just very strong for us against bosses, and a bit of extra armor, although frankly with the Harlequins you don't really need that so much. We only take the damage reduction from elites. Then we come up through here, get the additive damage to burning and elites, mostly just so that we can come up here and get to the burning instinct node. We come through here and get a bit more damage reduction for burning enemies, which is very nice. The fire resistances doesn't matter so much. But yes, the burning instinct node, you want to be capping this, which with the amount of intelligence you'll be stacking, you need to get to 1600 intelligence for this to be capped at 80%. And this gives you 80% multiplicative burning damage. We don't stack crit damage on this build because critical strike does and crit damage does not work with dot damage. So yes, we've maxed that to 80%. That's very, very powerful for our build. We're then coming through to the Frigid Fate board, and the reason for this is mostly because this legendary node actually works very well with a lot of builds on Sorks, even if you're not playing the cold Sork. So we're coming through. The glyph I've put in here is the Conjurer glyph. And this is mostly because it just synergizes nicely with the conjuration skills. 20% extra duration. It means your ice blades stay up longer, meaning you can stack more on your conjuration mastery. And it gives you a pretty nice amount of extra conjuration additive damage as well. So that's very nice for the Hydras. We're coming down here through the vulnerable damage and intelligence nodes, which you can see we've got all the bonuses for, and then we come through down into the Frigid Fate node. And now here I haven't quite maxed this out yet because I need a Greater Affix Tower of Shah ring still, but it is entirely viable here to get to 60% multiplicative bonus damage to vulnerable enemies, which is based on your bonus damage with cold, but it doesn't require you to do cold damage to get the bonus from it. It just requires you to do damage to vulnerable enemies. So if you get lots and lots of non-physical damage, that scales your fire, lightning, and cold damage, which means you can get to 60% here. So you need to get to 300% cold damage through non-physical damage, and that will allow you to get to 60. So I haven't quite got there here, but if I get the Greater Affix on Tower of Shahs, I will absolutely get there. And then we come down here just to get the extra damage reduction from vulnerable enemies, because that's nice for tankiness. And that's pretty much all we take from this board. And then we go upwards into the Enchantment Master board, mostly because we can come up here, and again, we can get quite a bit of free non-physical damage up here. So we come up here, we grab these nodes up here for non-physical damage and max life. Those are both nice for our build, for tankiness and for the damage scaling on the vulnerable node below in the Frigid Fate board. We come through to the glyph and we put in the reinforced glyph. This is because it scales all the rare nodes in here and gives you damage reduction while you have a barrier active, which you're aiming to have all the time. So that's again nice for tankiness. And more importantly here, we're getting the non-physical damage scaling from this node, so you can get 45% here. We don't overly need the resistances here, but the intelligence is nice, so we can't really complain. Plus 25 intelligence is an extra 3 and a bit percent damage there, multiplicative, so that's pretty nice. And then we pretty much just come straight out and exit this board, straight into the Elemental Summoner board. So we come over to the glyph, and we're using the Unleash glyph here. I've chosen to use this one because they buffed it a little bit this season, so you get 8% increased damage after spending 50 mana, and you're pretty much doing that all the time, and you get increased mana regen. You could absolutely play around and put in another intelligence glyph here if you like. There's a few other options. There's the Crackling Energy if you wanted to try and make that work on this build, although I haven't got it's the Crackling Energy procs. That could absolutely go in here. And there's probably another one in here. You've got the non-physical damage enchant slot one here as well. You could absolutely use this to cap your non-physical damage if you wanted to, the Enchanter Glyph. If you leveled this up, this would absolutely cap your Frigid Fate. But you don't really need this to cap your Frigid Fate node if you get the right gear, which is why I've used this one just for a flat 8% multiplicative damage. And the mana regen does help a little bit, so it basically helps us move towards having permanent mana. And it also scales your bonus to magic nodes, which we've taken only the ones down here because we don't need the resistances up here. So it gives you a bit of extra conjuration damage, a bit of extra dexterity. So that's quite nice. And then we come through, we get the legendary node because this just gives our conjuration skills more damage and reduce cooldowns or mana cost. And we can easily cap this to 60%. You only need 200% non-physical damage, and this will give you 200% fire, 200% lightning, 200 cold, and that gets you to your 60% here. So that's nice and easy to cap out. And then I've taken the Swift Conjurer node here because attack speed it does scale the speed of your Hydras at 100% effectiveness. So we're trying to strive towards 100% attack speed on this build, although it's pretty hard to get there. But the more attack speed you can get, the faster your Hydras will attack. And I tested this, it does make a big difference. So you get an extra about 10% here, which is quite nice, give or take, and a bit of extra conjuration damage. And then beyond that, the last two boards, we're just coming over into the Searing Heat board here, mostly just because it's a really easy glyph to activate. So we come over here to activate the control glyph here with the dexterity. That gives us 10% extra multiplicative damage with our Frostbolt node all the time to non-unstoppable and boss monsters. And it means that we get 20% extra damage against boss monsters or enemies that are frozen or stunned, of which we've got Lucky Hit on both in our build as well. So that's just very powerful. And the additive crowd control damage will apply if we've got the chill on enemies. So this is quite a powerful glyph for the build with the Frostbolt enchants on. And then the final board, we just come down here into the Caesar's Conduit board, again, because it's a really easy glyph to get into and activate. And we come down here just to activate the Exploit glyph because we are aiming to make enemies vulnerable as much as possible with the Ice Blade attacks. And this is mostly useful against bosses or single targets or more tricky targets where your Ice Blades can focus attack them. I tried Lucky Hit vulnerable, but the Lucky Hit chance on Hydra is just a bit too low, and the Hydra tempers for Lucky Hit chance is currently multiplicative on their Lucky Hit chance, not additive. So even if you cap all of those tempers out, you can only get to about 4, maybe 5% Lucky Hit chance on Hydra, which is not very high. So for now, this is the Ice Blaze is the best way to apply vulnerable. So that covers most of the Paragon board. This is all available on the build guide. It's exactly the same for leveling as it is for the final builds, and it seems to work pretty well. It's pretty optimized to try and cap out intelligence where we can. Every single bonus node is activated in the rare nodes, so you're getting all the bonuses from those as well. And beyond this, we'll get to the gear. So this is the final Uber version. To start with, Helm. I mean, this is pretty much god tier for most builds right now that require cooldown reduction. So Harlequin's Crest. As you can see, I do not have a greater affix on my cooldown reduction. I've only got one temper in it. But pretty much Harlequin's Crest is... I've tested an Andariel's Visage here, but the Lucky Hit chance on the Hydras is not high enough to proc it enough. If we can get that Lucky Hit chance up, and Hydra Andariel's version of the build would absolutely be more viable than this. But for now, this is the best way to go. The plus ranks to skills just enables us to unlock all of the skills for our enchants without having to put points in them. It makes our teleport and ice armor stronger and the cooldowns go down on them, our ice blades stronger, and so on and so on. It doesn't scale our burning damage on our Hydras, but it does give us a little bit of extra hit damage. So overall, this is still pretty useful, and the extra damage reduction is very strong. For the chest plate, Tyrael's Might, which is just insanely strong right now. Again, I've not got a greater affix on the damage reduction, but this is what really gets the build going. You get these two in here, you become suddenly very tanky on this build, and you can still do a lot of damage with it. And because there's movement speed on here, you can now sacrifice movement speed on your boots for mana per second, so you can still get infinite mana without requiring it on the chest piece. We then come down to the gloves, where we've got intelligence, attack speed, and damage over time. The reason I've taken these stats is intelligence, as I've said already, it scales damage immensely. Attack speed, that scales our Hydra's attack speed, so that's very strong. And damage over time, we pretty much just want to stack that everywhere we can because that scales the burning damage. Even though it's additive, the more of that we can get, the better. And especially with all of the burning damage multipliers we've got going on with combustion, with the Burning Instinct legendary node, and the multipliers from Firewall and Firebolt, it all scales on that damage over time value, and intelligence scales it further. So you can get your burning damage ticks up to about 500 million with this build. I haven't quite got there, but I've still got quite a long way to go, and I'm already between 300 to 400 on staggered enemies and about 100 to 200 million on non-staggered. And then for tempers here, we've just taken one of the Lucky Hit crowd controls. We've taken Lucky Hit Freeze, and we got fire damage over time because we just want to stack as much fire damage over time as possible, and that scales up burning damage. So for the pants, this is a tricky one because the third stat, there isn't any obvious stat to go for. So intelligence and max life, they're absolutely obvious. But the third stat, I've currently got dodge chance here. You could put impairment reduction here. You don't need armor because your Harlequin's Crest caps your armor out. You don't need resistances because you're capped from Material's Might. And everything else is kind of not that useful for our build. So I've taken Dodge Chance just because it does give you an extra chance at lucky avoidance of damage. But you could take pretty much anything here. I would say you could take something like the Tybalt's Will, and it probably would be viable, and it would give you more damage, but that would be at the cost of a damage reduction aspects, like which we're using concentration here. So yeah, you really need the concentration aspects here, otherwise you're just going to end up being too squishy in the endgame stuff. So we've taken again. We've taken the Dodge Chance. We've taken one of the other lucky hit crowd control effects, Slow here, which is actually quite useful in this build, and I'll get into that in a moment why, because most builds you just don't want the slow, but on this one you do. Warmth, very powerful for this build. It just gives you, as I said before, that's 1% of your health per burning enemy per second, so that's 3% per burning enemy per second from just that item alone. And then, yes, we've taken the concentration aspects. And just, I forgot to mention before, the gloves. This is absolutely key on this build. You need the Serpentine aspects. It gives you an extra Hydra. The duration is useful, but the extra Hydra is absolutely key. That's a 50% damage multiplier straight up because you've got a third Hydra. So that's very, very powerful. You can put that on the gloves, you can put it on the ring. It doesn't matter. It just needs to be on the build somewhere, and not on the amulet on the weapon because it doesn't scale with the 2 times or the 1.5 times. Moving on to the boots, I've opted for a legendary here, and the reason for that being because it has the concussive strikes aspects on it. Again, that's another form of crowd control we're applying at lucky hit chance, and it means on bosses when they're staggered, that's a 20% multiplier of damage that you didn't have before, so it's very powerful. You could put Metamorphosis on here if you want more anti-crowd control, or you could put any other movement speeds aspects on here if you like, but I quite like having concussive strikes here for the extra damage. And then we've taken intelligence, maximum life, and mana per second. We don't need to take movement speed here as such, because we've already got it on Material's Might. The mana per second here is quite key. You don't need a greater affix on it, and you don't need it to be particularly high. This +4 roll here basically gives me permanent mana. When I've got Ice Armor up and I'm casting Hydras and stuff, I never run out of mana, ever. So you don't need a particularly good roll. You just need 1 roll of mana per second on this build to keep your mana at permanent high levels. And then we've taken Lucky Hit Stun here for another form of crowd control and Lucky Hit. I've tempered on movement speed here. It wasn't a maximum roll, but you could get, this is where you could gain your extra movement speed for free. And overall, this is pretty good. And I've taken the +3 evades implicit. The reason for that being I prefer that over the others. I find that more useful during boss fights, which is when you really need them more, and you can just evade attacks more often. But you could absolutely take the attacks reduce your evade cooldown if you prefer that one instead. Moving on to the weapon. So the weapon, we use a staff because that comes implicitly with damage over time on it, which is great. We need the 2-handed weapon so we can scale our aspects by 2 times, so we can get double bonus out of it. And we take intelligence, maximum life, and damage over time here. Intelligence is obvious for damage, maximum life for tankiness, and damage over time to scale our damage. We've taken fire damage over time on the tempers because that again scales our burning damage further, and most importantly, you take casted Hydras have plus heads, and you want the best roll you can of this. And in an ideal world, you'll have a triple masterwork in this because then you can get to +12 heads, which means if you've got +12 heads on your staff with the Serpentine aspects on, you can get to 48 Hydra heads. I've currently got 42, so all of the video footage in this YouTube video is based on 42 Hydra heads, but you could get another 6, which gives you another 1/7 damage straight up from the Hydra heads on this. Another thing we could do here, if you felt you were tanky enough and you didn't need maximum life on your staff, you could go for all damage or vulnerable damage or one of those other additive types, but I feel like the maximum life is probably better here, especially if you can get a greater affix on it. It's just going to give you that extra layer of tankiness that you would need in the high-end content. And then the aspects here, I played around with these. I played around with having engulfing on a flame on here and creeping death. I've taken creeping death here because this I find to be more consistent in the high-end content. In the high-end content, you don't tend to get the enemies down to below 50% health instantly, and you don't tend to fill the entire of bosses or high-end tough enemies' health bars with dot damage, like when their entire health bar is filled with the dot damage meter, which is how Engulfing Flames gets really powerful. This aspect here works more consistently, and the most important thing here is every single different type of crowd control effect that is on an enemy that isn't unstoppable or a staggered boss gets a 40% multiplicative damage bonus. So that's slowed, chilled, frozen, stunned, immobilized, and so on, dazed. We've got that on our boots so that you can see where I'm going. That's 5 or 6 right there. That's up to 240% multiplicative damage that can be on any enemy that's not unstoppable or not a staggered boss. And then when it's an unstoppable or staggered boss, which is pretty much permanently on bosses, you get an 80% multiplicative damage over time increase. So it's that gives us a permanent damage bonus to bosses, regardless of whether they're at full health, under half health, or so on and so on. So I find this to be better for consistency, which is how I like to build my builds. And then moving on to the amulet, which is where I've got Engulfing Flames, because it is still very powerful. We've got intelligence here, and I've currently got attack speed here, but in an ideal world, I would have Endless Pyre, because I've done the math. Endless Pyre would give me up to 4 more ranks, and that would give me another 20% multiplicative burning damage. And even though I lose a little bit of damage from attack speed here, that would, due to the reduction in attacking of the Hydras, the extra multiplicative damage would outweigh that quite a lot. So I'm going to keep rolling this and try and get to Endless Pyre. That will give me more damage. We've got Conjuration Mastery here. I don't have a greater affix on it, but the absolute best in slot amulet that I think for this build would be Intelligence, Endless Pyre, Conjuration Mastery. Attack speed is absolutely fine here. Cooldown reduction would be absolutely fine here as well, or any other useful stat you think in there would be useful. But absolute best in slot, I think, would be Intelligence, Endless Pyre, and Conjuration Mastery. I can't understate how powerful Intelligence is now. If you've got 2,000 Intelligence and you get, say, 15% Intelligence on your amulet, that's another 300 Intelligence. And then if you divide that by 8, you're up to about 37, 38% multiplicative extra damage. It's like having another aspects on your gear. So it's very powerful. And then on top of that, for the tempers, we're taking warmth and fire damage over time. Again, for defense and for the extra additive damage. So this amulet I've got here will be very hard for me to replace once I've rolled Endless Pyre on it. But yeah, you can absolutely play around with that second stat. Conjuration Mastery is the absolute must-have. Intelligence is a very nice to have. The other stat can be any other useful one. Engulfing Flames here. This is where I was going before. So the first part of this aspect only kicks in when the enemies are burning and it's below 50% life. So if this was on a two-handed weapon, it would give you 90% multiplicative damage when they're below 50% life. The problem is that doesn't work at all, does nothing when they're above 50% life. That was what I mean about the consistency. The Creeping Death tends to be more consistent. And the second part of this aspect, if it's on a two-handed weapon, would give you 200% multiplicative increased burning damage to enemies while they are affected by more damage over time than their total life. This means when their health bar is entirely dimmed and darkened when it's filled with dark damage over time. This would work well if you're working with other damage over time builds and you can build it to that point. And when it is completely filled, it absolutely slaps. But the problem is in the high-end content, you never get to that point, really. So that second part just never really kicks in. And in the lower-end content, you're killing it all so fast anyway. The difference between 150 and 200% multiplicative here isn't that necessary. So I've put this up in the amulet because once it gives you the extra bonus damage below 50% life still, and it means when you're farming, you're still benefiting from the second part as well. I've still not worked out a way to make it so you can fill up the whole health bar quick enough to benefit from that second part against the very high-end content. But you can against Uber Lilith, that second part does kick in eventually, and it absolutely wrecks her. So that's why I've decided to put them that way around, which is different to other builds, I believe. We go with the Tower Charge here. It's pretty much a non-negotiable. You can only proc 3 out of 4 of the elements here, unfortunately. I really wish there was a way to proc the 4th, but I've not figured one out without the Andariels on, which just doesn't beat out the Harlequins right now. But this gives us the non-physical damage, which is very nice, again, for our Frigid Fate node in the Paragon board, and cooldown reduction is very useful for this build. The Potent Warding is also quite nice for extra resistances to your fire resistances and stuff, it's not absolutely necessary. And the lucky hit chance isn't completely useless here, although Hydra's base lucky hit is 3%, so it's pretty negligible. But most importantly, it's the aspects on it. We get 60% multiplicative damage here, so that's very powerful for our build. And then moving on to the final ring, I've gone for intelligence, attack speed, and damage over time. So intelligence for the damage scaling, attack speed because it scales our Hydra's attack speed, and damage over time because it scales our additive damage. I did play around with the idea of having lucky hit vulnerable here. I tried taking off the shredding blades aspects and put on the lucky hit vulnerable aspect. But I found it did work reasonably well, but you were losing quite a lot of damage for it. So in another world, you probably could use lucky hit vulnerable here over damage over time and try that, and maybe you could get better vulnerable application, but it's at the expense of damage. I've gone for damage here, and I just rely on the ice blades to give me that vulnerable damage, and it's mostly the difficult enemies and bosses. You want that anyway. The trash mobs tend to die pretty quick anyway. And I've taken Resource Gen here just to help with our mana situation, and extra fire damage over time again, so that we can stack loads and loads of burning damage. And the final aspect we've taken here is the Shredding Blades aspect, because most importantly, it makes it so it scales our vulnerable damage by 30% multiplicatively, and it makes our Ice Blades just have that chance to apply vulnerable up to 80% rather than 60%. So they pretty much almost always apply vulnerable, which is very handy, and you're likely to have 2 or 3 of these up when you're against bosses. As for gems, we've taken intelligence across the board because that's just extremely strong for scaling your damage. You could absolutely take rubies here if you want to take more life and defense, but this build's pretty tanky anyway, so you probably don't need rubies here, but you could take them. You'd just be at the expense of damage. I've gone for damage over time, amethysts in the weapon, because that just scales our damage without any conditions applied to it. And to be honest, on this build with the Harlequins and Tyrael's Might on, there is nothing you can put in your jewelry that's absolutely useful. You do not need skulls, you do not need resistance gems, but I've just put skulls in here anyway. But yeah, as you're leveling up, you probably want to use diamonds or resistance gems to help you capture resistances before you've got a Tyrael's Might. And then when you get into the end game, before you've got your Harlequins and such, you probably want to use skulls just to help get your armor over your cap of 9,230. And if we look at my stats panel, you can see my intelligence is pretty high. I can probably gain another 200 to 300 intelligence here, I works out, once I've shifted all the stats around. So that would be another, I don't know, say 20 to 30% multiplicative damage to gain. It's about one more aspect's worth. I can get the resistances higher than 80.5 with a Tyrael's Might. I haven't even masterworked this to 12 yet, but if I got a greater affix, this would go up to 85 or more, so that would be very nice. We've got at the moment 59.7% attack speed. That would go down if I put Endless Pyre on here, but you can make that up with the attack speed lucky hit potion if you would like. And also there's greater affixes to get here as well, so you could make up probably to about 60% and then get your lucky hit potion on, so to get you to 75% attack speed, which is pretty nice. Crit chance doesn't really matter on this build. I did try the destruction glyph. It doesn't seem to be working for me right now. I could not in any situation, regardless of this build skill or anything, get the destruction glyph to proc. Some people said it's working for them, but it does not work for me, so I'm not using the critical chance damage scaling glyph. I chose to use the control one instead of the vulnerable one. We come down to all the additive damage. As you can see, we've got a whole load of non-physical damage here. We're not quite 300 for cold, but that's where we'd want to be to get the full Frigid Fate node up to 60%. And then we've got a whole load of damage with burning, just under 1,000%. But once you're out in the wild, that scales up by 80%, pretty much straight away from your burning instinct node. And it scales up with all your other multipliers. So you go well above 2,000% damage with burning, which is really nice. You've got your additive damage conjuration here pretty high, and you've got a little bit of extra damage to burning here. Your max life is not massive, but we can, with greater affix on the Harlequins, with greater affixes on the pants and the boots, I reckon we can get this up to over 20k, which is pretty good. That's more than you need, really. I mean, this is just fine for all the endgame content as it is. It will just be easier and more tanky in that case. We've got a whole load of damage reduction here from the Tyrael's Might and Harlequins, which can scale further. Loads of damage reduction to elites, loads of damage reduction to vulnerable, and huge amounts of damage reduction for burning enemies, and extra dodge chance layer as well. So this just leads to us being actually, as a sorcerer, not completely one-shottable by most enemies, which is pretty nice. Got a decent amount of movement speed. Once we've got Conjuration Mastery on, you can go to about 180, 190%, so it's not slow. Mana regen's enough. You never run out of mana, as you'll see in further parts of this build. And cooldown reduction is currently at 38.3. This will go up to at least 54 if you can get your triple masterwork and your Harlequins with a greater affix. So I'm still searching for one of those myself. So overall, this is a pretty good build overall. A pretty well-rounded build, I'd say. And we will go and display this in all the bosses. Okay, we're going to do Tormented Varshan. Again, we've got the Elixir Advantage on for the extra attack speed. And here we go. We're just going to open her up. We're going to give her a firewall underneath her to give the burning damage. The second spawn, I'm going to teleport on them for the extra lightning multiplicative damage. You are going to probably have to play the mechanics here, just try and avoid those platforms underneath. But once you start getting going, the burning damage will absolutely ruin this boss. These extra adds on the side, you can just choose to place your Hydras down near them and they will focus and kill them as well. But on the meantime, the second Varshan is staggered, he is dead. As you said, didn't even really need the stagger, dead. So, nice and easy. Okay, we're going to go do Tormented Grigoire now. Again, we've got the Elixir Advantage 2 on for the extra attack speed. And here we go. I'm going to summon him up. We're going to hug the wall over here to avoid his initial square. We're going to place a firewall down now Hydras in preparation for him to come down. The second he spawns, we're going to jump on him. And then we're going to dash back into the middle of one of the squares to avoid damage. And then we just want to stay away from him mostly. You don't really need to be near to him. You can just avoid him with teleport, just to one of the middle of the squares. Just use it as like a little bit like a chessboard. And your Hydras will just absolutely annihilate him, to be honest. And there you go. Tormented Grigoire. Again, nice and easy. So, yeah, there you go, guys. Okay, we're going to go and do Tormented Tzir now. We've again got the Elixir Advantage number 2 on for the extra attack speed. And here we go. We're going to summon him up. We're going to place Firewall down where he spawns so we can get the extra burning damage straight away. Place your Hydras down. Second he spawns, you want to jump on him and teleport and then dash out. The extra procs for the lightning damage again. Use Firebolt occasionally to get the extra damage there. Ideally you want to stay away from him because it's his physical attacks that give the extra debuffs. And you can just let your Hydras do the work and he'll go down pretty quickly. You can just keep away from him and there you go, he's dead. Nice and easy. Okay, we're going to go and do the Beast in the Ice Tormented boss. We've again got the Elixir Advantage on for the attack speed, and here we go. I'm going to summon him up and place a firewall down for the extra burning damage. The second he spawns, we want to jump on him with teleport for the extra lightning damage, procs on Tower of Shards and the Elementalist Glyph. And then we use Firebolt just to get the extra 25%. And the idea is just to try and burn him down as quickly as possible so he dies there. So he dies before he jumps in the air, which is absolutely possible in this build. And there's still power to gain here, so yeah, nice and easy. Okay, we're going to go and do a Tormented Duriel. Same as before, we've got the Elixir Advantage 2 on for the extra attack speed. So we're going to come in here, we're going to start him, we're going to bring him up. We're going to stand over here, we're going to place down our Firewalls and Hydras in preparation for him. Again, we're going to try and teleport on top of him the second he spawns to get the extra lightning damage, elemental procs from the lightning damage from the teleport. And we can also avoid that first mechanic doing that as well. We use Firebolt occasionally for the extra burning damage, and once the burning damage starts ramping up, he should go down pretty fast. The main things to do with Duriel is to avoid his poison blast that he puts on the floor, and to avoid the move that he spits out. That gives you the debuffs. Otherwise, you're pretty much good to go. And there you go, he didn't even get a chance to use it again, he just died instantly to the burning damage. So, he's pretty straightforward for this build. We're going to go and do a Tormented Andariel now. Again, we've got the Elixir Advantage 2 on so that we get the extra attack speed. And here we go. We're going to summon her up. We're going to just move over the way a bit. We're going to put a Flame Wall and Hydras down in preparation for her. We're again going to try and teleport on her to get the extra procs with the lightning damage. And then we're just going to move away from her. And we're going to put a Firebolt on her for extra burning damage. And just stay away from her so she doesn't get the debuffs on you. And to be honest, she should burn down pretty fast. You can place down a Hydra on each of these pylons and they will go down pretty quickly. And there'll be one over here, so the great thing about this build is you can point and click anywhere and the Hydras will spawn. So it's actually a pretty straightforward build. You put one down on each for example, and they will all just burn down while you're just doing your thing. And with your teleport you can get around easy enough. And then once you've done those stages, again you can just put your Hydras down and just watch it burn down. I think we might have one more stage here. Yes, we will. So it's probably easier just to focus on these individually, but you could absolutely go for the for each one at the same time if you wanted to. And once you've got through those stages, she's just dead. So she's pretty straightforward. There was absolutely no problem there. She didn't break through my barriers, and the Hydra did most of the work for you. All right, let's get one of his blood maidens going, and let's see See how hard this build can carry these guys. This is absolutely insane. You place your Hydra heads down and sit back and profit. Everything just melts. 3 times profane mine cages, and it still just absolutely wrecks everything. Let's see how it does against the Blood Maiden. I'm quite literally holding down my Hydra button right now. I'm doing nothing else. Mana's infinite. And these other guys are just standing here, looking, doing nothing. Well, this is not true. There is one. Oh god, Bloodmane's dead. Well, GG's. That was easy. Okay, the last thing I want to show you is doing a 101 pit to show that it is viable. This build is by no means going to be the highest pit pushing Sorc build, I don't think, because it does struggle in getting up to the boss. It's pretty good at bossing though, this build, so once you get to the boss you tend to get them down pretty fast. As you will see, killing the mobs isn't the easiest, but a 101 pit should absolutely be viable, so we're going to just accept the pit here. We're going to go in, and we're just going to wait for us to load in. And then we're going to get going. So you're pretty much just going to aim to try and focus on the elites, the same as any other build. It's absolutely viable. If you get the snakes, they're just not very nice, I guess, for most builds. The problem with this build is you don't get a lot of AoE as such. The firewall is AoE, but it's not your main damage scaling. The Hydras do, so it is your main damage. But as you can see, I can absolutely kill the stuff. It's just not going to be your fastest pit farming build. But this build excels more in hordes than it does in pits, because you don't have to rush through the dungeon to get to the elites, and you can just focus on the enemies, especially if you're in a team. The issue right now is the same with any minion builds or companion builds, is you can't set them what to focus on. You just place them down and they do their own thing. But a 101 pit is absolutely viable. It will be absolutely viable to get higher than that on this build. I haven't tried pushing it yet, but I think once I've got it cracked a bit more, I will try and go higher. I would be surprised if I can't at least do a 120, maybe a bit higher than that. But that's not where this build really excels. This build absolutely excels on farming, and it excels on bossing, particularly. So you'll see once we get down to the boss, that the boss will go down in pretty good speed. So the problem really is getting to the boss more than anything. The Hydras spread their damage across lots of enemies as opposed to focusing on one. If it was viable to do an Andariel's version of this build, which I tried, this build would be absolutely insane for AoE. If you could get the Andariels to proc enough on Hydra heads, it really would absolutely blast AoE out like no tomorrow. But at the moment, the lucky hit chance scaling on Hydras is just too low to make that really viable. So we're not doing this in too bad a time. It's currently just under 2 minutes, sorry, and we're over halfway, so that's pretty good. This is a pretty good map segment so far. We haven't had the enemies haven't been too bad, and it's nice and open with lots of elites for us. Just going to focus on these elites here, keep the firewalls underneath them, keep a firebolt firing down on them, keep your ice blades on them to keep vulnerable down. And if you're struggling with tankiness, which you can see I'm not right now, but if you are, you can just kite and let your Hydras do the damage as you run away. We need to make sure we get rid of these. This is where it gets a bit tricky. You need to get those resistance mobs down, and you can't set them to focus on them, so it can take a moment. So that can actually slow you down in pits while you try and get those resistance mobs down. But once they're down, things will start to drop pretty fast. And as I say, if you wanted to, I'll just demonstrate you could kite like this, and your Hydras will just attack behind you, damaging everything. So you don't even need to face tank stuff if you don't want to. But if you're able to, you can just sit there and focus on them, and they will go down pretty fast. So we'll just try and find the next video. We're going in the next segment. Let's see what we get. Okay, we've got this segment, fine. Well, we probably don't want to take that in the face. And one of the great things about this build for bossing is, especially with the new pit boss mechanics applying debuffs, you can actually stay at range on this build. You don't really need to get down and dirty and close with the enemies. You just place your Hydras down and then you just spend your time avoiding the mechanics if you need to. It's not as bad as, say, playing a melee build where you have to get up close and then you really do have to try and avoid the mechanics a lot more whilst you're trying to deal damage at the same time. So that's kind of nice about this build. So we'll just focus on getting these elites down, and hopefully we can get to the boss nice and quickly. So I know 101 pit is nothing to scream about, but it's pretty much the gold standard for farming pits, although Hordes obviously excels compared to pits now for farming masterwork materials. But if you can do a 101 pit on a build, that means you've gotten to the highest amount of damage you're going to take from enemies and pits, and as you can see, that's not a problem on this build. And there is absolutely more damage to gain on this build compared to the gear I've got currently. I could probably gain, I reckon, about 60 to 80% more damage on this build if I got everything perfect. So if you imagine how much damage I'm doing right now, and then just scale it up by 1.5 to 1.8 times in damage, that's probably what you could achieve if you got absolutely perfect gear. And you'd have your cooldowns better, so you'd be able to get more conjurations up probably with your conjuration mastery, so that would be nice as well. So at which point you would probably decimate these 101s like no tomorrow, and you wouldn't even have to worry about sitting here and killing mobs. They would just die super fast. So we're just going to avoid those and come over here. So we're just focusing on the elites, try and get them in the corner. The other thing is, suppressors are bad for your projectiles, but the thing with Hydras is you can just keep I'm just casting them over and over again, because you just want to be spending mana to proc all of your ice armor, cooldown reductions, and glyphs and such for spending mana. So as you can see, you just let your Hydras do the work. So that's taken just over 5 minutes. Not that quick, but it was okay. The boss should go down pretty fast though, once it gets going. I need to get that proper teleport on there for the extra 25% multiplicative damage. It's crowd controlled almost immediately. Once the boss gets below 50% life, you will do an awful lot more damage to it due to the engulfing flame glyph. So we're going to crowd control him again pretty quickly. And then once it's crowd controlled, he'll just die. There we go. There you go. That took about 6 minutes, so it's not that quick, I understand, but that's not terrible, to be honest, for a build that's not really excelling in pits. So there you go, guys. There's a 101 pit on the Burning Hydra build.